Hey, everyone, and welcome to the Psyched to Practice podcast, your one stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insight from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm your host, Paul Wagner, and joining me, as always, is
Ray Christner.
And, Ray, an interesting Living Psyched episode for today, and one that I've seen an article about, and I think it has your name on it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So just did a blog post for Psychology Today about this idea of little treat culture. And by no means am I the first to write about it. This has been kind of a TikTok thing for a while. And that's actually how I became aware of it. I had an interviewer reach out to me, several months ago and said, "Hey, are you familiar with this TikTok trend of little treat culture? And we want somebody to kind of give an opinion about it." So I started watching some videos and kind of learning about it and thought, wow, this is kind of a neat thing to chat about. And I think the reason I wrote the article was that I was surprised the mixed opinions about it that I saw on social media. It was either people going, yes, this is a great thing, or people going, oh, we shouldn't have to do it. So I was like, let's kind of talk about the psychology and maybe how we can do it right.
Well, yeah. And in your post, Ray, really talking about the PREMAC principle, and, little treats is the trending title for it. But really, it kind of dates back to this PREMAC principle. And do you mind kind of going over like what that is for our audience here?
Sure. Yeah. So, the little treat culture is this idea that when we're doing something we don't like, we give ourselves a little reward at the end. Maybe you do laundry or you clean your house and maybe you stop at Starbucks and get a cappuccino or whatever kind of something that you would enjoy. And, I kind of went back to this idea of the PREMAC principle. And this is something that's, every intro to psychology class teaches. And it's this idea of we follow a less desirable task by a more desirable task. So sometimes people refer to it as grandma's law. That's the other name for it. So I guess it's taken it's all kinds of different approaches, but it's something that we know scientifically works. We've seen where we've told kids, got to finish your homework and then you can watch TV. It's essentially the same concept. Now we're just talking about it in a self-reward way and how we can do it, kind of on our own, specifically for adults.
And I think it's fascinating, especially because the backlash in a way, in the criticism of it, and I certainly can hear the voice behind it that says, we are an instant gratification culture. Why do we need to then reward ourselves for every little action? And I hear some merit in that, but at the same point in time, I think there's probably a lot more rewarding that we do than we really recognize. And, it can be, hey, I'm coming home from work and I'm just sitting down for a minute, or, I'm having a glass of wine to unwind, or, grabbing a beer, whatever that may be. So I think it's something that when we start to put a name to it, we maybe start to become more self-aware and self-critical of it, but it's been around for a while. And I think the application of it is pretty common, but if we can be more attentive and kind of intentional with it, I think it just helps us be a bit more productive and helps, at least make the productivity feel more worthwhile.
Yeah. And, I think where the criticism has value is that it shouldn't be that we're needing to reward ourselves for everything that's unpleasant that we do. And I think that the misinterpretation of it is that that's somehow got misconstrued that, every time you fold a shirt, you need to go and, take a nap. It's not quite to that level.
Oops.
Yeah, right? We wish sometimes, right? But it's, it's more kind of using it intermittently. And I think that, again, we can always go overboard with anything, but that's really not the intent. I think if people really kind of dive into what really are people talking about with it, it's really those little things that we can do on occasion.
Yeah.
Maybe not even every day, but that do keep us motivated to get, especially through things that are more difficult.
Yeah. And I think reserving it for those things in particular, like making sure the task is well defined and it is something that maybe we're not feeling motivated for, or
Right.
maybe, we started it and we just can't seem to stick with it. Those are the tasks when this be a real asset. As well as when we're feeling a sense of like, uh, maybe it's not a specific task, but just kind of where we're at throughout, like our, how much energy we have left throughout the day, or what our capacity to concentrate is. I believe you reference in the article that it spikes a little bit of dopamine, which is a wonderful tool, and
Yeah.
it really can really help out with follow through and completion of certain things. And so, whether it's a task that we can call out, we know, oh, this is going to be hard. How can I work to start thinking about this? Or if it's something that, hey, just kind of in the where we're at in our day, I'm struggling. I'm starting to find myself falling a bit behind, or contemplating, procrastinating. That's when this is, I think, most effective.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, you talk about the dopamine. I mean, I think the other piece is, this isn't something somebody just kind of made up on TikTok. We talked about Premack, but also there's really good research behind this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that when we do self rewards, it actually makes us work better, and makes us happier with our work. Which I think is kind of an interesting kind of concept. So, we hear everybody talk about, yeah, had a bad day. It's, whatever it is, people not liking work. But maybe if we utilize this in some way, those difficult days might be a little easier. Like, so, for me, it's report writing day. Like, I do psychological evaluations, and, I have several reports to write. Those are days that a little treat goes a long way. And it could be something really simple. I mean, it might be something where I go, yeah, I'm not going to cook dinner tonight. I'm going to, order out. Or maybe it's that I go home and watch a Netflix show that I've been wanting to catch up on. But I give myself something to go, all right, I know this is going to be a tough day. We're going to grind it out. And at the end, there's this, gold at the end of the rainbow kind of thing for me. And it just kind of keeps my day going. So, I think the important thing with it is it's not about the reward itself.
Yeah.
It's the fact, so it doesn't matter what you give yourself, or, what that little treat is. It's more how it makes us feel that's important. It's that pleasure that, dopamine you mentioned. When we do those things, that lights up, and it just puts us in a better mood.
And, I'd be curious to get your take on this. A conversation I had earlier this week with a client, and it was an adolescent boy, and his dad and I were talking, and he's talking about how he joined a sport and he was really interested, and then now come to find out he has multiple games back to back, and he feels like, I didn't sign up for this. This, if I would have known, I wouldn't have agreed to this. I don't have any free time. I don't want to go. I want to skip at least one game. And we're kind of having this back and forth. And his response was really focused on like, I want something to make it worth my while. And in the conversation, dad wasn't opposed to that reward, but didn't want the reward to be so focused on just the thing itself, but recognizing like, hey, this is kind of a more so for an accomplishment. It's not a transaction, so to speak. And I'm curious your thoughts of like really trying to define it as it's not this transactional of like, if this, then this, because it maybe doesn't give us a bit of that perseverance, or we're not maybe attending to it quite in the same way as hey, I've earned this in a sense, and like the earning of it versus just okay, I've completed this task, and relatively the same thing, but the different intention behind it. Do you think?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. It's one of the criticisms I saw when I was kind of digging into the TikTok world of this was, somebody said, well, when I stand in a long line, afterward I have to stop and buy a Starbucks. And I'm like, hey, is that really an effort taking task? Like, is that where maybe that's not something we're really putting this effortful kind of intention to? And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's a great way to frame it. And I tell people it's really, we're not rewarding just because we got it done. It's rewarding that effort. And I think it's a good way to frame it, because otherwise I think that's where people get in trouble, that it's, oh, because I did it, I have to do it. And it's like, we're putting in hard work. Like, I could, I mentioned writing reports. I could sit and just type nonsense the whole day and go, I get to go and do my reward. But it's not. It's me putting in a really good effort. We talked about homework. Same thing. It's not just getting it done. It's, hey, I'm going to put my best foot forward here. I'm going to really focus. I think things like sports are a little harder.
Yeah.
Because, is it an everyday little treat? Is it how does that look? So I think it has to be done thoughtfully.
Yeah.
But it can be done. I used to coach T-ball, and we would always, if we had a really good week of practice, there was at the concession stand, everybody'd get a snow cone. Like that was something that simple. The kids loved it. Like it kept them motivated, and it was something where it wasn't an expensive kind of deal, but it wasn't a reward because they just came. It was a reward because they as a team worked really hard. So I think we can apply it in those ways.
And I think that idea of even like a group little treat is a really cool cool concept, especially if it's a group task. And you saying that reminded me of in high school I played tennis, and after a practice, it wasn't uncommon for us afterwards to say, hey, let's go play ultimate frisbee, which I recognize two vastly different, but there was a big soccer field down next to it. And so that was something like where, if the effort and exertion that comes along with that, but then to look forward to like, hey, then I get to hang out with a group of, teammates, but also friends. And then I get to kind of goof off and have a bit more of that freedom and flexibility versus just practice and then transition away, and really not kind of taking that time to recognize the accomplishment that is and the effort that was put forward.
Yeah. I don't know that there's been anything written or discussed about it from a group standpoint, but I think that's really great. I mean, we see it in classrooms and in sports, but yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting concept. Like, can we little treat a class, or can we little treat a team? Yeah, I think we probably can. I think we do. I mean, I know teachers who are like, all right, guys, we're going to work on this project, and when we get it done, then we're going to watch a movie at the end of the day or whatever it is. It is the same thing. I just don't think we frame it like that.
And I think it gives it a broader application. And I think that's, the value of this is, how do we not just kind of copy and paste, what the little treat is or what the task that we're attaching it to, but really like, how do we help to generate momentum and an intentional response within something that's going to feel challenging to do? Yeah. And so if it's group, if it's, individual, if it's parent to child, like, I think even in romantic relationships, we can see this in, I believe, I'm fairly certain it was Ari Tuckman when he was on the podcast, he was talking about how for certain individuals with ADHD, being able to create this mindset that says, hey, let me do some of the household chores that feel understimulating, because it's going to then free up my partner, and then my partner and I can go and do more. And I think, he was referencing even working for more like intimacy in that sense. And so it can be something we see a broad application, but if we're not thinking of it, we can potentially miss out on some of the benefits of it.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I think we don't realize, you started out by saying, we don't realize how often we do it, and we do, but I think this is, again, I used the word intentional. I think that's a great way to frame it is, we should be looking at this in an intentional way. And you said something before we started recording, and it's been kind of rolling in my head. So I'll bring it up now, I guess, is, you were talking about going to the gym and having like a certain thing that you use. So I'll let you maybe give the.
And I think it was a friend of mine that was trying to get me into the gym. And, our schedules weren't really working out. And I was just like, I don't know that I really necessarily want to make a commitment. And he's like, hey, like, listen to only one audiobook or only one podcast when you're at the gym. When you're working out, that's your time to listen, and make it one that you're interested in. Like, don't make it one that you are like, I'm okay with leaving it unfinished, but it's going to then push you. And I like the conversation got brought up here before the podcast, because it's not really a reward, because it's not really happening afterwards. It's happening after the initiation, but then we're maintaining it throughout. And in some ways, when the task resolves, so does then the treat. But I think it still really applies here, because it's going to be something that's going to, create more of an intentional response and increases the likelihood of us, completing that task.
Yeah. So what I've been thinking about is, how do we put that in this framework of the PREMAC principle that we follow something that is an unpleasant task with something pleasurable when we're talking about it using it without. This is where my head's gone, and maybe I'm curious with your thoughts. But I always find that going to the gym is not about the workout; it's about getting to the gym.
Yeah.
So the reward of listening to the podcast is after we get to the gym. Once you're there and dressed, that part's easy. I never find that hard. It's showing up. So I think that it is the same thing because it's getting us there. It's something we enjoy. And, the interesting part, and I'd be curious, maybe we should look up some research on this, is that I just wonder how much that leads to then it being intrinsic. Because for me, I know once I get that routine going, I'm going to be more likely to do it. And then the motivation is probably really not about the book that you're listening to. You've now just created a habit based on that treat that you gave yourself. And then once it's a habit, maybe that listening to that podcast or that book or whatever someone does, maybe that maintains it, but it's probably not the only reason we're going to the gym anymore.
Yeah. And, I think that was kind of that curiosity that sparked it, of like, it pairs almost 1-to-1 with the action itself. Is it still considered this? But, I love that. Like, it's really getting there. It's that initiating. That's when then the reinforcement happens. It increases the likelihood. And because eventually that audiobook or that podcast is going to stop. Does that mean I'm stopping going to the gym?
Right.
Or do I just find something to supplement? And then at that point, it's less about the task itself. It's, hey, this is just when I do this. So I think it's a great way not only of completing kind of specific tasks, but it can also be a way of initiating healthy habits.
Yeah. And it's, and I think with all behavioral things, eventually those treats or those rewards or whatever we call them, reinforcers, they become more intermittent over time. I mean, we don't rely on them as much. And, I think maybe that's, now that we're saying it out loud, maybe what really kind of made me so interested in this topic and why I kind of kept looking at it is that, it's just a really good way for us, not only for self-care, but it's also for motivation, and it's also for behavioral change. It's, I think I gave you the example when I wrote my dissertation, that's how I got through it. I mean, it was, if I didn't write for 2 hours a day, I wouldn't let myself watch TV. But I would watch whatever I was into at the moment, I would be watching that evening. And for me, it was a motivator. Is that how I finished my dissertation? Probably not, but it maintained me throughout. And now I still love to write. And that was probably the hardest writing project I've ever had. So I think it's interesting. I think it's a great concept that when we do it right, it can really have a benefit for people.
And, in terms of doing it right, and, I don't know if we want to necessarily give it all away, but there's a couple takeaways in terms of like, how do we know that we're doing it well? And, just to kind of name that a few of those, it's like, hey, if we're setting those clear examples and clear goals,
right.
Identifying a very specific reward as well. And there's a few more, but there's one that I really appreciate, and it's making sure it's helping. And so, if it doesn't feel like it's, if it feels like it's more effort or more work, then it's probably not then a little treat. Like, right. So making sure that when we're doing this intentionally, we're actually recognizing like, hey, this is a reward to myself, because if we miss a bit of that, then it maybe takes away from some of the significance. And, if it's a singular task, one-time thing, not a big deal. But if it's anything that has a recurring, element to it, why not try to pair it so that way we're just increasing the ease and completion of it?
Yeah, and I think the other part of that, making sure it's helping, is also have to make sure it's not hurting. and meaning that, I think some of the criticisms that came out were, does this make us materialistic? And, I view this as not a, I mean, I've mentioned some things that coffee and things that people can buy, but I think if we do this well, it shouldn't be based on those kind of things. Like, you don't have to go out and buy ice cream and buy a latte. Maybe we do that sometimes. But there's so many other things that are rewarding in life that we can link it to. And so I just encourage, people, think out of the box a little bit. What are things that are going to tie you in? You mentioned ultimate frisbee or frisbee golf or whatever. Whatever that is. Right. It doesn't cost anything for you and friends to do that, but that dopamine burst still happens.
Yeah. And, I think in terms of maybe some guidance like of that, and certainly, apply this within your own, structure and budget, but, kind of think about like, what's the money you don't mind spending on a whim?
Mhm.
And, so if that is the, of $5 or, whatever the cost of a Starbucks like is like, and trying to limit that budget, because I do think it's something that can be, it can snowball quickly.
Right.
And also looking at the frequency of it. So, if I'm giving myself this Starbucks and, I don't mind spending it, but if I'm doing it 3 to 4 times a day, that's going to add up pretty quickly.
Pretty
and
quick.
if I'm doing that every day of the week, that, if anyone has a financial advisor, it'd probably be like, hey, well,
It's not a very healthy habit. Right?
But, so diversifying it. So if it is, hey, I'm spending the $5 or the $10 for this, maybe then let me delay that until next week, or at least putting a few days in between and finding a way that we can rotate in different non-material or non-spending based things. And, I think also if we are spending money, diversifying that between not only materials, but experiences as well. It can be
a great example.
like helpful, and it keeps it a bit new. And, I think everyone's experienced something where, hey, I do this so often, it starts to feel routine and mundane. Again, I no longer a treat at that point. That's when the book no longer is serving as a treat. It's just a part of the habit. But if the habit is spending, be careful.
Yeah, right. Well, and I think there's advice I would say for people that are interested in doing this is, you can do it a couple ways. I mean, you can set this, okay, it's only going to be $5 every time I do it, which again can add up. I oftentimes will tell people, think of it from a budget. Like, really, what's not your daily budget, but okay, what could I contribute a week to this part of life? And maybe it's only $5 a week. Maybe it's $10 a week. I think everybody has to kind of pay attention. I wouldn't go much beyond that. I mean, again, I want to always keep in mind, it's not what we get, it's the feeling. So keep a small budget for it. Don't let it get out of hand. Little things oftentimes mean even more than some of the bigger things we would get. I want to kind of focus here for a second, though, on this non-monetary.
Yeah.
So what are some thoughts you have? Like, what are some things you kind of go, okay, these are things that maybe people can think about? Like, we had some ideas.
And I would try to, even depending on the situation, or even if it's just like, one or the other, but little treats that are more relaxation based versus little treats that are more engagement based. So, and there's some that can kind of fit in between, but if it's, hey, I want to sit down and read a book, I think that's a bit more relaxation. Or if it's, hey, I'm going to unwind and play video games, that's relaxation versus, hey, I'm going to go for a hike. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to go and do the pickup game of basketball or ultimate frisbee or, whatever that maybe
Right.
is. And so finding something that kind of matches, if it's, I'm being really active, I might want that relaxation as that little treat. If I'm doing something that's really kind of cognitively draining, I might want to do something that's a bit more active
Right.
and a bit more engaging physically. And so I think being mindful of that, but, in terms of the relaxation, I named a few, taking a nap, calling a friend, being able to just finding something that feels meaningful. Gardening, I think, is one that for some individuals can be very relaxing. Others, it's a task itself. Maybe we need a little treat after gardening. I don't know. But for the engagement one, I think ones that can create connection as well as
Yeah.
maybe even another one. And yeah, I think hiking is probably one of the things I absolutely love doing. And for me, if it's hiking, kayaking, riding a bike, just doing something to get moving and feel active.
Yeah. So it's, and making sure that we're tying that reward specifically to the task, I think is really
Yeah.
important. And not feeling guilty because we do it. I mean, I think, and I'm going to use nap because I think naps, I've had people come in and go, oh my gosh, like I took a nap, and then they feel they're unproductive because they don't do it. And listen, I think there's a spectrum of naps. There's what we think of a nap is, okay, I'm going to lay down for 20 minutes, close my eyes, set an alarm, and get moving. That's a nap. If we're doing that for 2 hours, it's a problem. So really be clear and define it. And yeah, I mean, I love the idea you gave, kind of a mix of things and keeping them simple.
Yeah.
It's, and sometimes, it's interesting. I'll use my kids as an example. They don't realize probably how much they've been little treats for me through time, where it's like, where, one of them kind of, either one of my kids where, I would be, have a week that was really rough, and I would go, okay, my treats, I'm going to take one of them, and, we're going to go somewhere, maybe just walk around a farmer's market or do something. The time with them was the treat, that connection piece. And so, as simple as that sounds, for me, that was icing on the cake some weeks. It was, it's really, that was the experience that was comfortable. And, it might be just watching a TV show with my wife at the end of the day. We can make things really easier than I think sometimes we think we can.
And, I don't know if this necessarily conforms directly to the PREMAC principle, but my thought goes even to like when we're completing a task, especially if it's like an out of the norm task, and we feel a sense of accomplishment with it. If we can give ourselves that permission to stop and kind of bask in that accomplishment, that's a bit of a treat. And I'm thinking, I had a myriad of, issues with I had a GFI that slightly melted and caught fire over the past weekend. And, there was this process of, troubleshooting and going through. Finally, I rewired everything and got it fixed, and, figured out what the point of, what the issue was. And that's this week's problem. But, I sat back and I was like, yeah, I'm really happy that I took that time. And like, some of that self-validation, and like, if I was really busy, maybe I'm just moving on and I'm not stopping and appreciating it. So I think even stopping and appreciating in some ways can be a treat. I don't think it works for everything, but I do think it can sometimes be, that can be something that is just a really easy thing. And man, talk about it being an immediate.
Yeah. And I think that, I'm glad you brought that point up. I think that's a great way for us to kind of, move into wrapping this up a little bit is, that basking in the actual accomplishment, that might not come initially for people. And, it might initially take a few lattes. It might take, something like that initially. But I think where the brilliance of this whole concept is when we do that a few times and then we start experiencing the accomplishment. That's when it becomes, again, that kind of intrinsic motivation. And I used my dissertation as the example. Eventually I just started liking to write.
Yeah.
And when I'd finish writing, I'd be so excited about the product. That really was the reward at the end. But that's not how it started.
Yeah.
And so I think that, as people use this, thinking about, okay, what's the thing I might need right now? And over time, you may not. Now, listen, maybe doing laundry is never going to have that same motivation.
If only.
That's right. And maybe that's going to be the one that we have to reward ourselves maybe a little differently. But some of them, I think people would be surprised. And then, basking in the achievement, I think is a great accomplishment in itself when we get to really appreciate what we do accomplish on a daily basis. Life's tough.
Yeah. And so I appreciate the wins.
That's it.
Ray, if our listeners are interested in actually checking out the blog post, where can they find that at?
Yeah. So, it's Psychology Today blogs. And if they go to there and type in Living Psyched, which kind of fits with the podcast here. So there's a little extension from that. So if they just type in Living Psyched, it'll come up, and this one and other blogs. I usually try to do one about every 3 weeks or so on a random topic. So yeah, I think they can check it out there. And there's also a bunch of other resources that pop up when you check it out.
And, if want a real easy access, check our show notes and there will be a link in there as well. With that, we hope you enjoy this episode. Check back in 2 weeks. But until then, be well, stay psyched. The information contained in this podcast and on the Psyched to Practice website is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing in this podcast or on the website is intended to be a substitute for professional, psychological, psychiatric, educational, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please note that no professional patient relationship is formed here, and similarly, no supervisory or consultative relationship is formed between the host, guests, and listeners of this podcast. If you need the qualified advice of a mental health professional or practitioner, please contact services in your area. Similarly, if you need supervision on clinical matters, please locate a supervisor with experience to fit your professional needs.